Robert Sapir is one of those people that have been attacked by everybody on the internet who has a little bit of integrity. And here's the thing, one of the things that he does that is very, very scary is that he plays a game called selecting for stupidity. Selecting for stupidity, for those of you that don't know, is saying something so ridiculous that other smart people ignore you, thinking that no one else would believe what you're saying. Meanwhile, people who are less intelligent will flock to your stuff because other people are not attacking it. So they think there must be some level of validity to it. Unfortunately for Robert Sapir, a lot of people have climbed down to attack his ideas, which they say is pure pseudoscience. One thing that makes it easy for people to want to attack him is his extremely large viewership. This shows that there's an interest for the stuff that he says. Another is his obvious racism. This shows that he's extremely biased. And then a third is ability and need to manipulate information. Oh, and one more thing. He likes to censor people. Here is a compilation of people going after him for his views.
Robert Sepher video. For those of you who don't know, Robert Sepher is a guy who hangs out on YouTube, and he's like if you took a lot of those bad shows from the Discovery Channel and the History Channel after they went downhill, and you just distilled them into a single living creature.
We will come back to this woman because she made another video talking about how she was censored by Robert Sapir.
See from the thumbnail, we are indeed dealing with Robert Sepher yet again, the last real known anthropologist on this planet, according to him. I call him Lord Snowtep. Now, Lord Snowtep has made a claim that Mansa Musa is a white man, a claim which, by the way, I debunked a few months ago, and he never responded. I challenged him and his fans. None of them have been able to debunk what I said, yeah? The studies Sepher is using to make this hypothesis are actually conflating the Mande DNA. They include other ethnic groups who have higher Eurasian admixture, such as the Fulani. The Fulani on average have around 20% to 35% Eurasian DNA. So when you include them into the study, obviously it's going to skew the genetic evidence. In actual fact, the Mandan people usually have around 0 to 8% Eurasian admixture. Yeah, their paternal DNA is predominantly E1B1A, like other sub-Saharan Africans.
Them hitting him with the racist thing in particular, that's good. You know, Graham, that hits him. That hurts him.
He's very sensitive.
He doesn't, and that kind of shit, man. There are people that are Atlantis hunters today. There's the guy Robert Sepher. I hate to say his name even, but I will because he needs to be put on blast a bit. Yeah, that's me on the Joe Rogan Experience, and I'm calling out Robert Sepher for saying things that, well, he didn't like what I said about him, right? Like, he went out of his way to try to silence me. He claims that what I said about him was trying to silence him, but he immediately and directly tried to silence me by threatening to sue me if I said anything else, which worked about as well as you can tell.
So you can tell there that there's a diversity of people who come after him. The first being someone who's interested in paleo history, the second being someone who's interested in African history, and the third being someone who is interested in Atlantis. And as controversial as that point of view is, still he gets attacked by Robert Sapir. Robert Sapir, as you can see, has a level of fear for his ideas, which tells you how confident he is in his ideas. But all of these, I think, as well as they attack him, very, very difficult to understand, some of them, and some of them are not necessarily debunking his greater views. And so I want to watch a video in which somebody debunks the out of Africa debunk that Robert Sapir puts out there. And yes, that's what we're going to watch right now.
Robert Sepher calls himself the most dangerous anthropologist, but what makes him, in my opinion, one of YouTube's most dangerous pseudoscientists? An individual with a rabid following that will no doubt make themselves known in the comment section. His content is just interesting enough to capture an audience, and his ability to mix truths with half-truths and outright lies is impeccable, allowing him to slowly indoctrinate his listeners. He's gained a following of over 500,000.
So that's the tricky part about Robert Sapir. You think that he's just going to disappear. You think that he's one of these people that's just going to go away, or that's just going to be ignored, debunked, or any of this stuff. But he's smart enough to know not to let his audience go somewhere where there is real truth. In fact, his audience does not watch anybody really outside of him. And you can see this when you view some of the debunks of him. 90% of the people, the worst part is, have never even heard of this guy. And then they go watch his videos, and then suddenly they're hate watching, increasing his viewership. Now, he's one of these people, like I said, who censors certain things. And, I've definitely commented on one of his videos before on another channel, and I've seen my comment disappear. With the way he handles things, you would think that he would know that mainstream anything really is never going to accept his ideas. But he doesn't care because he's got enough people who watch him. And by the time they figure out that he is, let me use a different word, not being truthful all the time, he can just run away into the clouds.
Many of them are great people, and I hope they give this video a listen. They probably don't even realize that he published a book called 1666, Redemption Through Sin. That book highlights an anti-Semitic conspiracy in which he believes Jewish people have hidden the truth about Hitler.
So this is textbook Racism 101. I haven't fully checked if he wrote a book like that before, but if he has, it fits in very well to who he is. And you will notice that a lot of these people who come after Black people, they, for some reason, will also come after Jewish people.
Wake up and learn the true history of slavery, because that wasn't exactly a white men sport, okay? Jewish people were the ones that were trading us. Jewish people were in control of the slave trade. They've buried a lot of it, but it's there, and you can find it.
Now, there's some of you who are probably thinking, well, some Jews must have been involved, and that's fine to believe, but you must remember, Candace Owens is not the person to deliver this message. Candace Owens is the same person who said that Black people need to get over slavery and not use it as a way to make excuses in the modern world. And so why is it such an important point to point out that Jewish people were basically, in her view, the people who did slavery, and that white people were basically are excused?
Slavery was universal until good people in Europe and America ended it 2 centuries ago. Why? Because our so-called leaders, Black and white, wouldn't profit from it. Black victimhood is nothing if not profitable. It elects politicians and funds racial grievance groups. And if Black Americans began to view themselves as partners in the American dream, if we embraced the patriotic spirit that holds all men are created equal, the patriotic spirit that is our real heritage, then the race hustlers.
Anyway, let's go back to Robert Sapir and how he believes that, well, everything that's bad.
Didn't follow his Twitter account prior to his ban, so they didn't see when he tweeted that Jews were trying to subjugate Europe by flooding it with Africans. They don't even realize.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, this is the Great Replacement Theory, and a lot of people believe it. And a lot of people, for some reason, they like to blame Jewish people for just about everything. So it's not just Africans, it's Jewish people. Well, Africans in collaboration with Jewish people.
Realize what they are watching is dangerous. This video is going to be a complete dismantling of Robert, and my goal is for everyone to finish this video with a better understanding of how these people can manipulate others so effectively. And part of that is because it requires a documentary style video to debunk. But we're taking that on, and I'm going to dissect one of his recent videos called Debunking Out of Africa. Now,
so I've already attacked this video and other similar videos from the internet because out of this guy, like 30 channels came out that became bigger than his that basically make the claim that Out of Africa is debunked, which of course it's not. But the real reason why this exists is because Robert Sapir and other people want to hear things like this. And so when they do hear it, even some people who I would say are less, liary than he is, they start to gain the same type of confidence in ideas that he knows are completely false.
Robert does have a habit of using copyright claims to censor people, so you'll notice I have his voice sped up and some other small alterations in this video.
So we all know he does this because, of course, there are multiple channels, all disconnected, and not all academic or anything like that, as I mentioned. And that's why I put in the guy who is also considered a controversial person for his beliefs. Speaking of people I put in earlier, here is someone also claiming that he did this. This is the woman we saw earlier with the glasses. She did this video 1 year ago.
Super free speech policy, we get to have Robert Sepper's thoughts and opinions grace our timeline once again. Now, I wanted to see what Robert Sepper had to say so that I could add it to my clip compilation, but as it turns out, Robert Sepper has preemptively blocked me on Twitter, which I guess I understand. But what I don't understand is why Robert Sepper would publicly get into disagreements with people on Twitter, agree to a debate, and then run away and block that person. Historian Dr. David Miano tweeted, "This interesting fellow called me a bunch of names and challenged me to debate him, and after I accepted, he started making excuses and blocked me."
The fact that this guy blocks all these people tells me that he actually watches their reactions and goes, yeah, that guy's not on my side, block. That guy's not on my side, block. But there's still more people, as she explains.
I find this funny because Robert Sepper fans are always in my comments asking me to debate Robert, and I would be happy to. I know a ton of others who would be happy to as well. Zeke Darwin on Twitter, who's been blocked by Robert Sepper. Ancient Puzzles on Twitter, who's been blocked by Robert Sepper. All of us would be happy to chat with him, but he's too much of a sniveling coward.
Okay, as much as I'm enjoying that, let's go back to the original video.
The term Gish Gallop was first used in 1994 when anthropologist Eugenie Scott grew frustrated with an American young Earth creationist named Duane Gish.
And now with his initial statement from the Institute of Creation Research, Dr. Duane Gish.
At its core, Gish Galloping is using quantity over quality to support your argument. Instead of laying out a clear argument backed up by some main points, the Gish Galloper just lets a constant stream of worthless information spew out of their mouth in a confident manner. Once enough time has passed, the person debating the Gish Galloper has no chance to debunk all of the poor information presented and explain their side.
So we actually saw him do this in the video about Mansa Musa being white. I couldn't even react to that video because it was so badly done. It was basically, here's two pieces of information that are disconnected, and apparently they proved that Mansa Musa was white, even though he made no attempt of doing that. And then he repeated 8 minutes of another video that he uploaded that's got nothing to do with either West Africans being white or Mansa Musa being white. And then he says, see, conclusion. And then he plays a 30-second video about apparently Chinese people being white. And then he leaves. And the question is, why? And the answer is right here, gish galloping, which is a word that I've heard several times by especially people who love to debate online. I didn't know the origin of it, but I'm glad to see there is an origin. Now, I'm not going to lie, he's not the only person who does this. I recently reacted to a person who talked about slavery and how it never worked out for the Europeans. And that person basically did that, just commenting on any random piece of information and then agreeing on the important parts, meaning that he doesn't disagree. He just has enough words in there to seem like he disagrees.
And the Gish Gallopers audience leaves happy, thinking that their side won. Gish Galloping is a dirty but effective debate method in a live debate. It's really hard to go up against. But as Robert's about to find out, it doesn't work as well in video format, because if somebody like me wants to, we can pause it point by point and explain away his lies. I don't want...
Yes, but if he wants that to go away, he can simply copyright strike it, go against it, and all of those things. Now, of course, the problem here is that there's so many people who reacted to him, again, selecting for stupidity, which is trying to make videos that no one will react to. And of course, he grew to such a point that everyone started reacting to him, people who are way larger than he is. And so he has to go on a blocking campaign. And once you do that, you've pretty much proven that you don't believe what you're saying. It's one thing if you are saying stuff that is incorrect, and some people say I say stuff that's incorrect all the time, but it's one thing to say things that are incorrect. But once you start blocking people who disagree with you, then you get to the point where really we know you don't even believe the stuff you're saying.
This video to be an attack on Robert. I'm not going to talk about his credentials or his lack of credentials. I'm going to let him do the talking. I want to use his own words and show his audience that he is not the person he portrays himself to be. And for those of you who already know that he's full of it, I want to show you how to kind of pick apart his argument so that when others try to use it, you don't get stuck in the Gish Gallop.
So I appreciate that, because some of the stuff that he puts out there is from so many different fields, and it's hard to understand sometimes what they're trying to say. And so trying to disconnect them from the other words that he says is fairly difficult.
The Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines a straw man as a weak or imaginary argument set up only to be easily confuted. The straw man goes like this. Person B says, "That's silly. I just can't accept the idea that humans evolved from bananas. You can believe that, but I don't." The idea that humans evolved from bananas is the straw man. That isn't something that evolution theory says happens. It's a fake argument that person B made up so that they can attack that argument instead of evolution theory, trying to make their opponent look silly.
So the insidious thing about the straw man is that it has to be close to what the person believes. So for example, on this channel, when I talk about Black Egyptians, some people will come back with, hey, we've got DNA that proves that some people from ancient Egypt are Middle Eastern. And so there you go, debunked, right? And the answer is no, because at no point did I say there were no Middle Easterners in ancient Egypt. And of course, I've said that I have a problem with the word multiculturalism in ancient Egypt because these people belong to the same culture, whether they were Middle Easterners or not. Now, some people come back with, actually, ancient Egypt is multicultural. And I say to them, we're not using the word the same. To you, you're using multiracial as multicultural, which is not the same thing. But to go back to Robert Sapir, one of the things about him and he's straw man is that he does not attack normal YouTubers and stuff. So his straw men are for like scientists. He makes up information that's Googleable. You don't even need to go and watch anybody's YouTube channel. You just go into Google and say, do scientists believe this? And if the answer is no, then you've debunked him in like 5 seconds.
And while various hypotheses pertaining to humanity's origins are discussed at the university level, the out-of-Africa theory is heavily favored, despite compounding evidence to the contrary, because it seems to support a social engineering political agenda rather than a scientific one.
Out of Africa is part of a social engineering political conspiracy. That's a big claim. One that Robert has indicated he will be debunking in this short video, under 15 minutes, I believe he said.
So before he carries on, already he is doing something that is very tricky here, which is he is trying to connect politics, which of course some people have politics, and I've seen it themselves, that connect with science, but he's trying to connect the political people with the scientific people. And the reason for this, of course, is because politics is easy to attack, science much more difficult. This is why people, when they, even on my side, attack the DNA or anything from ancient Egypt, they will attack the politics of the people rather than the studies themselves, which in my opinion is more important to get to the studies, see if there's any bias, see if there's any change. Like the 2017 study that said that the Middle Easterners that were found in ancient Egypt had an increase sub-Saharan African DNA, but people who didn't read the original study didn't realize that the study was not claiming that there was no sub-Saharan African DNA, as they call it, but instead there was little, and the numbers were not 1% or something like that. It was like 10%. As we read here, confirming that the moderate level of modern DNA contamination in 2 of our samples did not affect our analysis. Finally, we used 2 methods to estimate the fractions of sub-Saharan African ancestry in ancient and modern Egyptians. Both QPADM and the F4 ratio test reveal that modern Egyptians inherit 8% more ancestry from African ancestors than the 3 ancient Egyptians do, which is also consistent with the admixture result discussed above. Absolute estimates of African ancestry using these 2 methods in the 3 ancient individuals range from 6 to 15%. And in the modern samples, 14 to 21%, depending on the method and choice of reference population. Now, people were quick to then run to, the internet and say, see, there's absolutely 0 sub-Saharan African DNA in ancient Egypt, which of course I wanted to point out that those people clearly had 6 to 15% sub-Saharan African DNA. And therefore, there was someone who was related to them who generations back must have been 100%, and they're located close to the north. So they didn't exactly fuse with some southerner people. So there must have been some population of Black Africans located in the north.
Next line, he's going to be offering one of those various hypotheses that he says competes with the out of Africa model for human origins.
Another theory which is touched upon is called the aquatic ape, which I covered in a prior video, that postulates that mankind did not necessarily come about from monkeys and great apes, but may have shared a common ancestor that evolved around water, whether on the surface of the earth by lakes, rivers, and oceans, or in subterranean caverns, which also contain similar bodies of water, with some upright walking hominins later taking to the trees to evolve into branch climbing monkeys or fur-covered apes.
So in my last video where I reacted to this guy, I basically had no idea what the hell he was talking about, but apparently this guy does. And when I watch this, I just dismissed it as he's just saying some stuff to confuse. But apparently there is a real theory like this. It's just been debunked.
Robert starts with an interesting take, trying to convince his audience that anthropologists discuss the aquatic ape hypothesis as if it competes with the out of Africa model. It doesn't. And even if it were true, it wouldn't compete with the out of Africa model. The aquatic ape hypothesis, which was proposed by marine biologist Alistair Hardy in 1960, proposed that humans have some traits that may have evolved in a more aquatic environment. The implication being that sometime between our last common ancestor with chimps and the modern day, a population we descend from lived near water and spent a lot of time in or around that water.
So if I understand what he's saying, basically this guy took a theory that doesn't even come close to debunking the out of Africa theory. In fact, it relies on it, and he tried to act like it's another theory, probably because he just Googled, well, he probably knows about other theories, and so he's probably choosing anything that's going to look like separate from the out of Africa theory.
Sort of like some modern day populations that have adapted to their more aquatic lifestyle. This hypothesis is not taken all that seriously by paleoanthropologists. It kind of sits up there with the stoned ape hypothesis. It can be kind of fun to talk about around a campfire, but the evidence doesn't necessarily support it. In fact, as we've learned more and more over the decades, we've realized a lot of those initial claims, they could be explained away in ways other than living near water.
I hope some of you can see how this channel can actually trick people into believing it. I actually used to think that a lot of his fans were, every single one of them were just people who know that he's incorrect, but they love hearing bad things about specific people because, of course, that's the type of stuff that he sells to them. But then I realized that some of them who used to believe in what he says and then have turned away from it, clearly there's some people who think they're getting proper information. You can assume that some of these people are like 15 years old or something, and they watch this guy's videos and say, wow, I need to go and prove what he says. And then they go to university and it goes completely the other way, and they realize this guy is a liar. That's when you realize, like, oh, some of these people actually are just naive.
But now let's listen to what Sepher says the aquatic ape hypothesis postulates, and let's see if you can identify the straw man on your own.
With some upright walking hominins later taking to the trees to evolve into branch climbing monkeys or fur-covered apes.
If the aquatic ape hypothesis were true, it would not mean that we didn't evolve from apes. I mean, look at the name, aquatic ape. So following that logic, the ancestor that adapted to the water would have had to have existed after the split between chimpanzees and humans. That common ancestor goes back around 7 million years. The aquatic ape would exist less than 7 million years ago.
Okay, so I did understand what he was saying. Yeah, that is a true debunking of that. And the fact that he put it so simply, I appreciate that, because sometimes some people, like the woman before, some of the stuff is too long and it's too difficult to understand. So I'm glad he put this in a very short, easy way to understand.
So when Robert claims that the aquatic ape hypothesis actually says hominins evolved first near water, and then some of them went up to the trees and became monkeys and apes, he is showing that he either lacks a fundamental understanding of what evolution theory says,
which is option number one. Option number two, obviously, is probably he's twisting the information on purpose, which is probably likely given the fact that he goes out of his way to block anybody who would contradict him.
Or he is setting up a straw man for his audience. And that appears to be the case, because he's going to keep building on this idea of monkeys and apes evolving from humans in this next segment.
And while this may sound...
So, of course, you can see why some people in the beginning, or why he would have assumed that some people would not react to him in the beginning. Saying something like monkeys evolved from humans sounds so ridiculous that people are just not going to take it seriously at all. Now, something he did not expect is that there's a lot of people on YouTube who know about science and have a lot of time on their hands who are going to basically come after him.
Counterintuitive, mainly because of decades of media conditioning. The concept does share some parallels among some of the world's foremost geneticists and evolutionary biologists, who may or may not also have received a coupon at Red Lobster.
Remember, everything Robert just said about some experts believing hominins evolved around water and then later moved to the trees where some evolved into monkeys and apes. He's now going to introduce one paleoanthropologist, and he's picking this one, trying to get his audience to believe that this smart, intelligent expert agrees with what Robert just said.
Now, again, I appreciate this person pointing this out for two reasons. One of them being sometimes when these people mention a name, we're very reluctant to go check because we think, oh, he also, all he is just another dumb guy, right? Who believes the same stuff that he believes. And sometimes it's important to have someone who's very familiar with the person just in case they're just bringing up another name thinking that the person would agree with the person.
Dr. Owen Lovejoy is a distinguished evolutionary anthropologist at Kent State University, Ohio, best known for his work on Australopithecine, locomotion, and the origins of bipedalism.
Lovejoy is a very crazy name. If that's his real surname, he's one lucky person.
True.
Lovejoy has published more than 100 articles related to his research and is most well known for his work on reconstructing Lucy, an alleged human ancestor with an opposable big toe on its feet, meaning they resembled thumbs for grasping branches and climbing trees.
Pretty much true, especially the information regarding Dr. Lovejoy. But he's being sneaky here to set up a future lie. When discussing Lucy's feet, he did not show the feet of an Australopithecine. Instead, he showed a picture of the feet of Artie the Ardipithecus. Australopithecine feet are much more human-like than that picture, and you'll see why I mention this later.
Well, that is quite subtle, and I missed it, I'll be honest. So I'm glad that the person put this out there so that we can all see it for ourselves.
Lovejoy claimed that Lucy, which was dated to 3.4 million years ago, was at least partially bipedal. He proposes that Artie, another alleged human ancestor dated to between 4 and 5 million years ago, spent more of its time allegedly walking than Lucy, despite being over a million years older.
This is one reason I had to explain that. There's another one coming up. Robert is now bringing up another hominin, Ardipithecus, the owner of those feet, in an attempt to cast doubt on our understanding of human evolution. It is true that Lovejoy said Ardipithecus appeared to spend more time on 2 feet than Lucy, but that's nothing out of the ordinary, and it certainly has nothing to do with the out of Africa model, which takes place way after the Australopithecines. Like, out of Africa is referring to humans, not Australopithecines, so who cares?
Missed the trick there. This is part of the Gish Gallop that he was talking about earlier, where he's just stuffing a lot of information and trying to go, okay, so here's information, therefore out of Africa is not real. Which again, as I mentioned in the video where he claims that Mansa Musa was a white person, which is one of the most ridiculous things that I've ever heard. He does this as well, where he puts irrelevant information, stuffs it into the video, and then says, I got a video for you that you won't believe.
This article titled, Man Did Not Evolve from Apes, says, a U.S. biological anthropologist says he's determined humans did not evolve from apes, but rather, apes evolved from humans. Kent State University professor C. Owen Lovejoy, who specializes in the study of human origins, said his findings came from a study of Ardipithecus ramidus, a hominid species that lived 4.4 million years ago in what is now Ethiopia. Quote, people often think we evolved from apes, but no, apes in many ways evolved from us.
He did say this. Robert Sepher wants his audience to believe that by saying this, he means humans literally existed before apes and monkeys.
So you can imagine, right, one of Robert Saper's fans going to Google this information and say, you know what, let me go see if this Lovejoy guy said this. Maybe Robert Saper is lying to me. And then he goes and checks and the quote is there. Then he goes, well, I guess Robert Saper is not lying. This is why I say that some of his fans probably believe this guy puts enough information out there that even to someone who's slightly skeptical, if you're very skeptical, you're not believing anything that this guy says. But if you're slightly skeptical, what could happen is you could run into the trap of him using half truths, as this person pointed out, you running into information that you don't realize is designed for you to check and designed for you to basically trap yourself.
And then apes and monkeys evolved from those humans. That is not what Dr. Lovejoy is saying. No one with his level of expertise would actually believe that. Dr. Lovejoy is trying to make a completely different point with this line.
It has been a popular idea to think humans are modified chimpanzees. From studying Ardipithecus ramidus, or Ardi, a partial female skeleton, we learned that we cannot understand or model human evolution from chimps or gorillas.
What Dr. Lovejoy is trying to say here is that the common ancestor of chimpanzees and modern humans was not a human or a chimp. And many people imagine that the common ancestor was probably way more chimp-like. However, chimps, just like us, are highly specialized to their environment. And realistically, they have probably changed quite a bit too since that common ancestor. So we shouldn't just assume that the common ancestors of humans and chimpanzees looked like a chimpanzee. Maybe they were a little bit more adapted to upright walking, and then chimpanzees specialized back for the forest. That's what.
So anybody who knows about anything about evolution of the human beings then knows that the common thing that let's say apologists or religious apologists say, which this is one of the debates, is like, if we came from monkeys, how come monkeys are still around? Which of course the answer to that question is very simple, which is we didn't come from monkeys, we came from a common ancestor. And basically that's what the person is trying to say, in that we are assuming that it would be closer to what a primate would have looked like, or the other primates would have looked like, but maybe it's something that could go in both directions, and it looked something somewhat different from both of us, or somewhat similar to both of us, which makes sense in my head. Now, how seriously or not seriously that is taken is another story. You'd have to go real deep for that.
He's saying there. What he is not saying is that humans existed before apes and monkeys, and then some of those humans went up into the trees where they then became apes and monkeys. Like, he's not saying that.
I wonder how many people enthusiastically, after watching this video, went and told their friends, their family, their coworkers, whoever, that actually human beings are the founders genetically of apes. That would have been an interesting day for the person once those people basically debunk it.
But Robert Sepher is taking him out of context and trying to use him to mislead his audience.
Of course, Lovejoy is still very much in the mainstream, and while he proposes that humans and apes shared a common ancestor that was neither human or monkey, at least he makes it clear that the popular idea that humans are modified chimps is false.
Nothing is really added here. Robert tries to imply to his audience that the evolution theory model states that humans evolved from chimpanzees and are modified chimpanzees, but that's not the case. That's another straw man. Now that.
So again, he missed something here to clarify. So I think I'm going to have to clarify it. He said, because Lovejoy is still in the mainstream. So in other words, he's trying to say that because he is in the mainstream, he's not going to be fully honest about the information, which is why he is going to say that it's neither monkey nor man, but something ancestral, when in actual fact, what he should be saying is that this thing used to be human, which of course is deception.
That's the end of Dr. Lovejoy's time in this video. You tell me. Has bringing this paleoanthropologist up supported any of Robert Sepher's ideas, or has it all been a part of the Gish Gallop?
Okay, cool. I'm glad he brought it around, because I was saying, like, why did he miss that part of saying that this is basically a Gish Gallop? That is a Gish Gallop. This is him just saying stuff that you go, God damn, I'm already too deep in the waters. It's time to swim back. Don't let me get too deep.
My own analysis is that neither Lucy or Artie, which were a little over 3 feet tall, walked upright at all, and were both primarily tree dwellers, not only because their feet resembled hands, like other apes, but because their furry ape-like bodies did not sweat, the way all bipedal hominins do, as sweating is a trait that is associated with running and hunting, which neither of these specimens did.
So I think he's being a bit vague with his terms. Apes definitely can run, and other animals can run, even though they don't have, they don't sweat like humans do. And I don't actually understand what he's trying to say with that part. By the way, when I say they don't sweat like humans do, I don't mean they don't sweat at all. I mean they don't sweat like humans do. Like if you see a human being just start running, you will see.
First off, we have footprint trackways. These exist and you can find plenty of papers on them. But this is one of my favorite parts. Because he cites Dr. Lovejoy, a man that has actually worked with these specimens, studying them in person. He's an expert in anatomy, specifically the evolution of bipedal locomotion and the skeletal system of ancient hominids. He is also part of a team that has spent 17 years studying Artie's remains. But then Robert basically says, but everyone else is wrong, and me, the person with no relevant experience or education regarding ancient hominin locomotion, I'm right, because Australopithecines didn't sweat like modern humans.
By the way, the reason why he is comfortable stating this is, of course, I mean, outside of ego, he wants to put it in such a way that he is this, it's actually weird, like persecuted, yet the one guy who's willing to stand there in front of the waves and take everything and become the real anthropologist, as this video states.
Indeed, dealing with Robert Sepper yet again, the last real known anthropologist on this planet, according to him. I call him Lord Snowtep.
We honestly don't know how much Australopithecines could sweat. They could sweat some. Chimpanzees can sweat some. Realistically, the trend that led to our really efficient sweating was probably already underway by this point. He also
Well, there you go. See, I was right. They can sweat a little bit.
mentioned that the reason was because sweating is associated with running and hunting, which neither of these specimens did. But that's him misleading you. And before that specialization of endurance running would have occurred, we would have been adapting to that thermoregulation as the climate was warming. So, this again is Robert Sepher picking and choosing carefully what he's going to reveal to his audience to try to construct this web of lies.
So I wish he wasn't being so technical with these terms. But basically, you can hunt and you can run without necessarily, sweating the way that human beings do.
The artistic reconstructions in museums are deceptive, showing erect, upright models with human-like feet, which is a fraud.
Showing upright models isn't fraud, especially when the evidence suggests these animals did walk upright. And despite what Robert says, their feet were pretty similar to humans. Remember, this is where that little seed he planted earlier, that little innocent lie, where he showed the Ardipithecus feet and said they were Lucy's feet. This is when that comes into play. Because Australopithecine feet, they were much more human-like than Ardipithecus feet. And if you're keeping track, we still haven't discussed anything that goes against out of Africa.
Well, we should also talk about the fact that a lot of missing information is still out there about those creatures. And so those portrayals, a lot of them are based on the best evidence that we have right now. I think that's the part that's needed. And of course, there's a whole bunch of other hominids that have been added into this entire family. Now, obviously, what he mentions is very important. He hasn't mentioned anything about out of Africa yet. And that is, again, done on purpose. And think how long this video already is, and this guy hasn't even started. Now, some people would say maybe you would need to go this far back in order to debunk it. But he's not going back in order to debunk it. Instead, he's going back in order to confuse. And then after, by the way, he's doing something else that which I call selecting for the board, which is some people are going to watch, they're going to get bored, and they're going to leave. The people who are continuing to watch are the people who want to hear the conclusion, which they feel is going to be the same as what the title said. So some people are going to go, boring, and then leave, especially people who don't care to debunk ideas that are stupid.
And while they're not completely fake specimen like the Piltdown Man, which was a baboon's jaw glued onto a human skull and touted as the missing link by the British Museum for almost 50 years.
First off, the Piltdown Man wasn't the only evidence of human evolution we had at that time. We had many Neanderthals and even Homo erectus specimens. Secondly, the Piltdown Man wasn't a baboon jaw. It was an orangutan jaw. Not important, but it does show how little research Robert actually does. And finally, the Piltdown Man was a hoax perpetrated by a con man named Charles Dawson that desperately wanted to be taken seriously by archaeologists of the time.
So basically, he's the Robert Sapir of his time, which, by the way, I don't think he desperately wants to be taken seriously, but he acts like he desperately wants to be taken seriously.
Many scientists were suspicious at the time, but technology was nowhere near where it is today, and it wouldn't be until later that technological advances and advances in science would allow them to disprove this hoax. In the 1940s, chemical tests were developed that would eventually allow scientists to prove that the Piltdown Man was a hoax, a combination of human and orangutan bones that had been manipulated to look like a missing link. In reality, as we found more evidence of ancient hominins, more and more began to doubt the Piltdown Man due to the fact that it appeared so much different than the other evidence they were finding.
So basically what happened was somebody took advantage of the fact that people were not too aware of the science back then. And so he is trying to say that basically they did it on purpose and they put a fake thing in there, and they probably are doing it with the others. But let's let them discuss it themselves, because it is a bit of a tricky situation.
So really, this is a pretty good story about how and why the scientific method works.
Or the Nebraska Man, which was another imaginary creation based on what turned out to be a pig's tooth.
This one's a lot less interesting. It was a single tooth found on a Nebraska ranch in 1917. 5 years later, the rancher sent the tooth to a Dr. Osborne for identification. Dr. Osborne tried the best he could, and based on the morphology of the tooth, he classified it as an ancient primate, being careful not to imply it was hominid or an ancestor of humans. You'll note that creationist sources and other pseudoscientists like Robert Sepher are careful not to mention that because they want their listener to believe that the scientists were making up this creature to support the idea of human evolution.
Okay, so I was right. So basically what he's trying to do is use a misunderstanding to try and put in the idea that they faked something on purpose and therefore are faking other stuff as well. So yeah, it's a Decepticon tactic. Now, I'm not saying we have to believe either of these people from the face. I mean, you have to do the research. Obviously, I can't shove all the information that I'm reading into this video, but I did want to just react to this video so that we can see that there are people out there who are debunking Robert Sapir, and that, again, his videos are not something that are like, oh, you just need to watch it and you'll know he's lying.
Science is a liar sometimes.
Oh boy.
Even at the time, the find itself was considered inconclusive by most of the scientific community. And when the London News presented an illustrated image of the supposed ancient human ancestor, Dr. Osborne was not impressed and had this to say: "It's a figment of the imagination, of no scientific value, and undoubtedly inaccurate." More fieldwork a few years later uncovered more of that ancient skeleton, and researchers were able to show that the tooth didn't actually belong to a human ancestor, but an extinct genus of peccary that lived in the Americas from 15 to 5 million years ago.
Which, by the way, is probably interesting all by itself. If the person who brought it in had said that and didn't connect it to human beings, I mean, I'm sure he would have been seen as like a, still a great discovery.
With that find, the previous classification was corrected. Scientists aren't perfect. We are human. This is an example of an honest scientist who made a mistake and later retracted that find when new evidence was presented.
The missing link is still very much missing.
The missing link argument hasn't been a thing in over a century. Homo erectus exists, Homo habilis exists, Homo heidelbergensis, the Australopithecines Robert mentioned earlier. All of those would have fit the criteria of a missing link between modern humans and our last common ancestor with the other modern apes, which was.
So, for those of you that don't know, the missing link from the point of view of the apologists on the other side is basically to always create a new missing link. So, the missing link is like, okay, so what's in between these two? When they find it, they go, what's in between those two? When they find it, what's in between those two? This, of course, means that it will go on forever in an asymptotic direction and never really reach any conclusion. So the missing link thing it's basically a waste of time.
The original missing link. So the fact that people still use this term as if it's actually valid evidence against human evolution, it's kind of sad.
And the linear hominin progression proposed by the out of Africa model,
Strawman, evolution isn't linear,
continues to fall apart as advances are made in the field of genetics.
If this were the case, I'd expect to see some evidence presented proving that in this video. We are halfway through it now, and out of Africa has yet to be addressed.
I mean, all he's basically done in this video is misinterpret tons of information by people, which, by the way, you would think doing this much research, he would actually just do real research and get rewarded for actually like actual information. You know, I've seen people who sometimes they go into the other conspiracy theories, and then I think, you know, if you actually put all of that attention into like something real, you could probably discover something. Like, not a lot of people have that level of attention.
The obsolete and politically motivated out of Africa model proposes a single and relatively recent transition from archaic hominins to anatomically modern humans in Africa.
I want to quickly line out.
So before this guy comes in, isn't it weird that almost everything he was saying was very vaguish, a little bit like, it seems like, at least it's not like those other frauds. And then when it comes to this, it's like, absolutely, the basically the fake out of politically motivated, like this one, he seems to like try and stamp it as if it's a fact. Everything else, he was being a bit, you know, like whatever about it.
What the out of Africa model actually suggests. Because part of Robert's game plan here is to strawman out of Africa as well, and a lot of his audience has a warped view of what the scientists actually say.
Which basically tells you that he's about to lie about this type of information. You know, I know some people who give another argument for why they think the out of Africa thing is whatever, and it's less weird than this guy's thing. I don't understand why he picks the tricky route out of this. Oh, actually, I do. It's because he knows that, well, he's basically, it's like some animal that was sitting in the dust and it's just shaking and shaking. It's like you're trying to get rid of the easy ones first before you go jump into the water.
The out of Africa model says that the last common ancestor of Neanderthals, Sapiens, and Denisovans existed from Africa into Eurasia between 1 million and 500,000 years ago. As the climate...
Okay, something has to be explained. Denisovans are another one of these that were discovered, and it turns out that we have, well, people outside of Africa have some DNA from Denisovans. So that part needs to be explained too. I understand that this guy probably has a lot of the information, but sometimes you have to just explain it for the people who might not. They're called Denisovans because of the Denisova cave that they were discovered.
Shifted, this habitat that was suitable for humans also shifted, especially around northern Africa, causing populations of this ancient species to become fragmented and isolated for hundreds of thousands of years. The isolated populations up north would evolve into the Denisovans out east and the Neanderthals to the west. A population isolated to the south would continue evolving into what we now call sapiens.
So you can see here that it was not necessarily needed for the Homo sapiens to win in this race. We just happened to be the species that went along and did what we did. I mean, it could have been Neanderthals, it could have been Denisovans. I think there's another one in Australia, the short one. I don't remember what they called it. But yeah, there are still some more. And then, of course, there's the ghost DNA that was found in Africa. So, yes, this is how we know that Africans really started this game. It's not just one piece of evidence.
Anatomically modern humans. As the climate continued shifting, the southern range of Neanderthals and northern range of sapiens would occasionally overlap. Evidence of gene flow from sapiens and into Neanderthals over 200,000 years ago proves this. Eventually, around 70,000 years ago, a wave of sapiens left and was successful this time. They grew in number while the Neanderthals and Denisovans decreased and eventually went extinct.
So he did mention that there were some that were unsuccessful, but yes, we can prove that there are some humans who had left the continent earlier, but they basically did not end up being part of the human game basically into the future. They just sort of died out, probably due to the climate.
Because we know Neanderthals were in Europe and Denisovans were out east, we can also identify when our species was first getting to those regions because we would be interbreeding with them when we got there.
So it seems so obvious today, and of course, all discoveries, including inventions, seem very simple once they've been discovered. But the way he's putting it is a little too simple. We thought that human beings did not mate with human beings. We meaning human beings. We thought that they didn't mate with them. And even though there were some who were suggesting it at the time, for the most part, a lot of people were pushing back on it and saying this is just wishful thinking. And then Svante Pabo and his people, they discovered that actually it had happened. And that's where we get the idea. It's not as simple as, oh, we went out of Africa and just mated with them. And this we just discovered. It took some time. By the way, this information was actually huge at the time because I remember things like DNA testing for your ancestry and stuff like that got really popular at that time. And also, even radio stations that never talked about anything like that, they were interested in it. They were like, wait a minute, what? Because, of course, it's a very weird thing.
Which is not supported by the fossil record, followed by a later migration to the rest of the world, replacing other still existing hominin populations, which again is not what happened.
Yes, it is. It's supported by both genetics and the fossil record.
So the genetics part, I thought he was going to explain it. The genetics part is Svante Pabo was the first to get a full DNA of the Neanderthals, and so was able to compare it to human beings, where they found very small percentages of it on human beings. And then, of course, there's a lot of things that get tricky over there about, you know, where did it start? And it seems like it started early and blah, 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 blah. In another video, I showed how the Chinese, they went and basically reproved this again and again, because of course scientists don't just sit there and go, that's real, so I'm just going to assume it and then carry on.
DNA sequencing of modern and archaic genomes has now conclusively and irrefutably demonstrated that humanity is a hybrid species and that racial differentiation exists because we're comprised of various degrees of different hominin species which interbred within the past 50,000 years.
This is a very problematic statement, and he's once again hidden a little lie in his claim. First off, DNA sequencing does show that our species interbred with other species as we moved around. Neanderthals, Denisovans, and other distant ghost populations. But that doesn't make us a hybrid species in this sense. We are sapiens, the species that originated in Africa, and we interbred with some of the other species. But it does not back up the claim that racial differences are caused by that.
So obviously he talked about how we are not a hybrid, but instead mainly Homo sapiens from Africa who then spread and had some of their DNA come from these other peoples, which of course I've shown you that there's some people who take the one in Africa and then try to twist it into something bad, and then they take Neanderthal, which by the way some people used to say it was a bad thing, and now they twist it into something good, which tells you their motivations. Again, what he was about to say is it doesn't prove that that's where our racial stuff comes from, although I have to say that some people do slightly say that some of the physical features and even some of the things like whatever traits inside of us that, you know, deal with food or whatever might have come from these people. But this is very different than claiming that we are different species altogether.
In fact, it shows the opposite. One of the main competing models to the out of Africa model was the multi-regional model, an idea that modern human races all evolved from separate species of humans that evolved in different environments before more recently blending back into one, and then that blended group, that was sapiens. While parts of that were true, we did blend with other species. The part that tries to connect that to racial differences isn't true at all. A lot of the things we think about when we think about racial differences, those came to be much more recently because populations are always evolving. I guess.
Damn, he decided to show the one that shows that light skin in Europe came around 8,000 years ago. Don't show that before they start calling you an Afrocentrist. Don't worry, though. There's a lot of Afrocentrists out there in the scientific community who believe it. Apparently, anybody who believes that is an Afrocentrist, according to a lot of these Europeans. Or, by the way, they're getting given money by, let's say, by a country in the Middle East that is not Muslim.
That's what I'm trying to say here is that it's not accurate to believe that the different groups of people today look different because of these other species that interbred with their ancestors. That's not true. And this is important to bring up because Robert's going to try to use this to imply current modern day populations are actually more primitive and less advanced than other populations. And that's where this video, that's where I see real problems with it.
Okay, so he's basically going to say it, because I was going to say earlier that the guy that I'm quoting who tried to say that Africans ghost population, he got that from Robert Sapir. And then they go, I don't know how these people work, but they go and take some one guy's idea, blow it up, and go crazy with it.
Because these are racist implications. These are fueling the white supremacy. Again, I'm not saying that is his motive, but it is true that this content fuels those people.
So to be careful like he is, let's not say it's his motive. It just looks like everything he does is going down the line where it would be his motive. And the only way that it wouldn't be his motive is if he is a very, very, I guess slow is the word, person. Somehow he can coincidentally use racist ideas, even writing, according to this guy, a racist book, and then somehow doing that by mistake. If that's how it's happening, well, I guess I'm wrong to assume that his takes are just simply racism for the general audience, a general audience which also is very racist. I can't prove all the way that his audience is racist, but some of the comments that he gets, basically they repeat racist lines, which I don't know how this happened, but basically mocks Black Americans, and they tend to use stereotypes used on Black Americans for all Black people around the world, which is why most defenses of Black people today, coming from all parts of the world, are trying to defend African Americans, because somehow African Americans became what people generally think about Black people. Not even true statements about African Americans, stereotypes of African Americans.
And they seek out this content. It makes them feel good. Robert doesn't like when this term gets brought up to describe him. Again, I'm not doing that. I don't know Robert. But the field of human evolution has certainly been warped by white supremacists in the past.
Yeah, don't say, huh? They actually did that in the past? That's crazy.
In this article published in Nature, we read that ancient humans lived in a Lord of the Rings world and indulged in interspecies sex, including Neanderthals, Denisovans, and a mystery species, which anthropologists have labeled a ghost species, meaning it's considered super archaic, not yet identified in the fossil record.
This part, 90% true, but a lie hides within. And it's being used to build up a bigger lie that, like I said, is going to cast a certain population of people in a negative light.
Yep, you guessed it. Like I said in my other video, it's the super archaic part of it. So basically, this ghost population, they try to say, is some population that was way back, and it basically took Africans backwards, mentally, physically, whatever. And that's what they're trying to say with that. And yeah, I already debunked that part already.
Everything he said before ghost species is true, but then he lied about what ghost species actually means. The term ghost species means that this is a species that we only know about through DNA. A ghost species does not mean an organism is super archaic, which means super primitive, super ancient. But now listen to what he says.
Which anthropologists have labeled a ghost species, meaning it's considered super archaic, not yet identified in the fossil record, but likely Homo erectus or Homo habilis, over 1 million years removed from modern hominins, and comprises up to 19% of sub-Saharan African DNA, not found in the DNA of Asians or Caucasians.
But likely Homo erectus or Homo habilis.
Robert Sepher made this up. The published paper that discusses this ghost DNA specifically says the ghost species branched off from our family tree around the same time as the species that led to the Neanderthals and the Denisovans did. So realistically, this hominin species was no more primitive than the Denisovans or the Neanderthals, which he acts like they're more advanced. And remember, the fractioning that led to those different species was caused by the climate, so it makes sense that within Africa, there were populations that became isolated too.
By the way, this ghost population thing is something to be proud of. We did find it. And of course, African Americans, including Africans, were used in the study because it is mostly tied to West Africa, not the entire continent of Africa. But of course, they use this little bit of information to then tie it to the entire continent and then say everybody in Africa, even if it was true what he was saying, then he then applies it onto all Africans, which is not true again, which means he's basically taking small amounts of information, exploding them to fit a narrative that he already believes.
Instead of being honest, Robert implies that the species that interbred with these sub-Saharan populations was Homo habilis or Homo erectus. Those are literally the two most primitive members in our genus. Remember, Robert relies on his audience not checking his claims.
And when that fails, he kicks them off the island. That is why his channel is so secure. Although a lot of people out there try to have some level of integrity, even people who, I mean, you saw there, even people who are considered conspiracy theorists, they still don't want to connect themselves to this level of filth.
This interbreeding event happened about 43,000 years ago in Africa. In other words, it's not possible for sub-Saharan Africans that contain this archaic DNA that is absent in Cro-Magnon to have left Africa 35,000 years ago and magically mutated into what became modern-day Europeans or Caucasians or Asians.
So this is why it's very important to have explained that part, that the DNA was for a specific population, not for all Africans, because now he's using that lie to try and say the out of Africa theory doesn't make sense, which if you think about it, you go, okay, well, if they already had the DNA, then that. But also, number two, obviously Africans left Africa earlier than that date as well, so that wouldn't even work in his worldview the way he puts it.
Interbreeding event did occur around 43,000 years ago. Now, Robert is going to offer his first attempt at debunking out of Africa, and it's a mess. He says that because Group A has this admixture from 43,000 years ago, and Group B that left Africa 35,000 years ago does not have it, then Group B cannot descend from Group A. It is very possible for a population to leave Africa that had not interbred with that other population with ghost DNA. But he snuck another big obvious lie in here. It's the magic of the Gish Gallop. I challenge any of you to find a source saying the wave of sapiens that led to modern-day Europeans left Africa 35,000 years ago.
Okay, good. So I'm doing good here. Yeah. So basically, again, he's running the lie. The simple two lies is that the theory claims that they left about 45,000 to 35,000 years ago, which is not true. They left earlier than that. Number two is that every African has this ghost population, which if they don't, already debunks this idea that, oh yeah, they must be primitive because of this ghost DNA, which by the way, you'll notice that all the rungs that he says leads to people being primitive. So not having Neanderthal, primitive. Staying in Africa, primitive. Having this ghost population, primitive. Everything has to lead to that direction, so that if one gets debunked, he can still claim this thing. Oh yeah, by the way, they're primitive also because Mansa Musa was a white guy somehow.
Not only are there plenty of sapiens fossils outside of Africa predating that, the genetic evidence makes it clear that the dispersal out of Africa happened at least 50,000 years ago. So this was Robert's only attempt at actually debunking out of Africa so far, and it's easily explained away. He lied about the numbers. Sure, 35,000 years ago, you could kind of trick someone into thinking that, yeah, they should have that admixture from 43,000 years ago if we're saying that they came from them. But again, that's a straw man. And the reality of the situation is that 35,000 number, it's inaccurate. 50,000 years is like the very, very conservative take. Realistically, it's longer. Australian populations have been there for longer than 50,000 years. So it's a straw man. It's poorly done. The numbers aren't even correct. And that's his attempt at debunking out of Africa.
So you can see here that everything else he said earlier is irrelevant to this piece of information, which he tries to use to debunk the stuff. In fact, in order for him to believe this, he'd have to sort of throw away a lot of those ideas. One of the things that happens here is that this idea that he says is actually so simple. It's so simple and so easy to debunk that really anybody could have seen it, which is why he has to put it in a mess of nonsense.
The next 2.5 minutes are rough. I really don't feel like most of it is worth my time, but I'll play it so I can point out some more of these flaws. Buckle your seatbelts because we're going to somehow get to Atlantis before we address out of Africa again.
Did someone say Atlantis? So obviously you can be an Atlantis hunter and not be racist. but Robert Sapir is not that type of person.
Them hitting him with the racist thing in particular, that's good. You know, Graham, that hits him. That hurts him.
He's very sensitive.
He doesn't, and
Yeah.
that kind of shit, man. There are people that are Atlantis hunters today. There's a guy, Robert Sepher. I hate to say his name even, but I will because he needs to be put on blast a bit. Yeah, that's me on the Joe Rogan Experience, and I'm calling out Robert Sepher for saying things that, well, he didn't like what I said about it. A significant enough subsection of you that I need to talk about this. I don't think most of you are dumb, and I don't think most of you are racist. I just think that you need a little... You need a little light shed onto the tricks that the man plays. So here we are. This is not me being some Flint Dibble-ish person. This is not Dan being woke and trying to turn around and do the same thing that I've claimed that Flint did to Graham to Robert. No. That's not this at all. This, just sit your ass down. Let's talk about this.
So we can probably react to that video some other time. Of course, taking into consideration that I do not believe that Atlantis was real. I don't believe any of that. I believe that it was made up, but we'll talk about it some other time.
So this leaves the question, where did Cro-Magnon, or modern Europeans, come from? When we look up the word indigenous in the dictionary, it says, quote, originating or occurring naturally in a particular place. Native. That said, the islands right off of the coast of Africa are known as the Canary Islands. And
so I want to point out very quickly that the word indigenous and the word native are very vague words. And with, obviously there's some things that are much easier to just objectively put as native to a piece of land. But a lot of the times the word native is so vague that you don't even know what necessarily it means in some situations. Let's say vague. Let's say it's slippery as a word.
The native, indigenous inhabitants were known as Guanches. They left behind tall, blonde, and red-headed mummies and were studied extensively by the National Socialists of the 30s and 40s.
The Guanches are mummies. The oldest one isn't even 2,000 years old. This is recent history, and it doesn't apply to out of Africa at all. So
let me quickly fix something here. The Guanches are not mummies. The Guanches are people who happen to have mummies, in the same way that Egyptians are not mummies, but there are Egyptians that were mummified.
Because this last 2.5 minute segment is so full of more gish galloping, I have to take it piece by piece.
If we look up the Guanches in Encyclopedia Britannica, it says that they were the direct descendants of Cro-Magnon, which makes sense, as the museum on the Canary Islands has the largest collection of Cro-Magnon skulls anywhere in the world.
So because I already know the history of the Guanches, I might as well just put it out there. So the Guanches are basically a combination of African and European DNA. You can see in the location that they're put that people from Africa and Europe could get to those islands, and they probably did. And then they formed what is known as the Guanches.
Also says that they had blue or gray eyes and blonde hair, which also makes sense, since the mummies that they left behind had blonde and red hair. It also links them to populations in Europe and North Africa. And not only do the Guanches share genetic affinities with the Basque and the Berbers, which are the natives of North Africa, all of these populations are among the highest percentage of Rh-negative blood factor in the world.
Again.
So let's talk about this part. So as the guy is going to mention, this has nothing to do with the out of Africa theory, but let's just explain it. One, the reason why there is red hair, which has been spotted by Arabs, early Arabs at the time, is because these people had Europeans coming down. And as you remember, early Europeans had stated that Europeans in the west parts of Europe had red hair and some had yellow hair. And so it's no surprise that people from Europe who came down had some red hair. Another thing that is not surprising is that North Africans would look fairly different than those Guanche people, which they do. I mean, as you can see, North Africans don't really have red hair. It's not typical in that area. But something that is very interesting is that he then shows Berbers, or he shows people who are in Al-Andalus, and he says, look, these people here have red hair, Therefore, these people are 100% related to these North Africans, therefore blah blah blah. Now, one thing you don't know about Al Andalus is that a lot of people who are native to Al Andalus converted to the Andalusian religion, Islam, and when they converted, a lot of the people that are Moors, a lot of the people who are Andalusians, they actually are native to that area. So they're Europeans who converted, and they too got kicked out, which is why there's an increasing amount of European DNA in North Africa, more than what you would find in earlier times. This, of course, is very different to Egypt, which they say the sub-Saharan increased there. Of course, there is an increase of sub-Saharan in North Africa as well, as they state, but it's nowhere near. So, of course, the question is, why is he throwing the Guanches into this conversation? The answer is he can't really use any of the other places located in the west of Africa because all of those people are West African. Also, he has to pick a place that's close to Africa to try and dismiss the out of Africa theory while not talking about the out of Africa theory at all. It seems like he's still talking about Africa, but really all he's doing is just mentioning a random group.
This has nothing to do with out of Africa. This is discussing really recent history compared to the out of Africa time frame, which says sapiens originated in Africa around 300,000 years ago, making occasional expansions north that would fizzle out before finally having some population succeed out of Africa around 70,000 years ago.
That said, the Basque mythology, which according to the Center for Basque Studies at the University of Nevada says, quote, "Where did the Basque come from? No one knows exactly where the Basque came from. Some say they have lived in that area since Cro-Magnon man first roamed Europe. Estimates of how long they have lived there vary from 10,000 to 75,000 years. Some say they were descended from the original Iberians."
This paper, published in 2015, entitled Ancient Genomes Link Early Farmers from Atapuerca in Spain to Modern-Day Basques, linked a population of farmers from Spain to the Basque population. These individuals lived between 5,500 and 3,500 years ago, half the minimum age of 10,000 to 75,000 that he just quoted.
Still lying, is he? Most of this information, of course, is tricky to debunk, but I'm glad he's doing it. And of course, he's throwing a lot of things. He literally threw, this is the crazy part, he literally threw Andalus in this conversation. That part is, if you needed proof that this guy can't keep his story straight, he literally threw in the Andalusians in this conversation.
This paper, published in 2021, which also found the Basque population to have been genetically isolated for less than 5,000 years. Again, either way, none of this has to do with out of Africa. It's just a cheap segue to drive the narrative to Atlantis.
More fanciful theories exist as well. One is that the Basques are the descendants of the survivors of Atlantis.
Any scientific stuff that he would have had reputation has been completely destroyed by him accepting an obvious fake thing like Atlantis. So yeah, we're pretty much close to the end of the video right now. So yeah.
The concept of Atlantis becomes less fanciful and more probable when one looks at Pleistocene or Ice Age maps of the Atlantic Ocean, when Atlantis was said to have existed and sea levels were much lower, or genetic maps of the Pleistocene distribution of DNA on both sides of the Atlantic, such as haplogroup X. But we never hear about...
Okay, so I don't know why he's letting it play out without interrupting. So Atlantis seems fanciful when you realize the person who wrote it intended it to be that.
These perspectives because the people that control the media and academia in the 21st century are the same people that were promoting the Piltdown Man hoax during the 20th century. I have a lot more to say on the subject, but I'm starting to get
hungry,
and also wanted to visit my favorite goose before I cash in my coupon.
Remember when I introduced gish galloping? This is the final argument made. Atlantis. based on a population that existed less than 5,000 years ago. This literally has nothing to do with Out of Africa. The entire video had one argument, and it was all based on a lie that sapiens first left Africa 35,000 years ago. So all of you people in my comments section on TikTok and here on YouTube, this is your source. When you say I have it all wrong and I'm not listening to the right people, and you recommend that I go watch Robert Sepher's YouTube videos, this is what I see.
I love how he's like, yeah, I would continue to tell you all this important information, but I got hungry. It is hungry work trying to basically go after a specific population. It's really never done anything to you. And yes, what this guy states, that this guy has fans, is absolutely true. Some of those fans have had one of my videos copyright strike because they didn't agree with the idea that Egyptians basically created the alphabet. And obviously I framed it as Black Egyptians because, I mean, there you go. And so they came by the thousands. Literally, that was one of the most viewed videos that I had on my channel.
I ended up on white supremacy forums, where I saw that in a strange twist, Robert is now being cancelled by some of his more extreme fans he once pandered to.
So you mean his fan base is toxic? What a shock.
He built his following by publishing anti-Semitic material, only to have his fans discover his family history. I honestly grew to really despise Robert as I learned more about him, but I don't know what to think about this. I also came across...
Well, I know what to think about it, and it's very simple. It's all of these groups run these purity tests on their heroes. Remember Nick Fuentes? His fans literally made him get a DNA test because his last name was Fuentes. And then when they discovered that he had other stuff in there, they started going after him. But then they were like, okay, you can be a useful idiot and we can use you. And then, of course, you have people like Candace Owens, you have blah, 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 blah. And the two groups that they always go after, and for similar but different reasons, Jewish people and Black people, for some reason, they're very addicted to that. And then, of course, sometimes they try to pretend that they're nuanced, like when Candace Owens says she loves Nigerians.
This post, and felt like I needed to address it before his fans flood the comments and point out that I'm just a middle school science teacher, not the most dangerous anthropologist. Yes, in this article, researchers describe a ghost species as super archaic. That species branched off from our lineage around 2 million years ago, over 1 million years before the other ghost species in Africa. And the interbreeding with this super archaic hominin actually occurred outside of Africa. Later on, the journalist describes the African ghost species as a super archaic. But I imagine that was just due to her using the same descriptive words as the researcher used discussing the previous group. As I already explained, the African ghost diverged around the same time as the divergence that led to Neanderthals and Denisovans, so the only way you could consider it super archaic is if you also consider those species super archaic.
But they won't, because they're not related to Africans. If it was the other way around and the ghost population was in Europe and the Neanderthals were in Africa, they would consider the Neanderthals super archaic and they would say the ghost population is some kind of great thing. The reason for this is because of their motivation. It is obvious to predict what they're going to say. That's why you can just sit there and wait for them to release the next piece of garbage. And also, none of these things are new to me. I mean, knowing where I live, I've heard all of these ideas over and over again. A lot of the people that I used to hang around with, they used to wonder why I used to talk to people who were racist, but that was because I was collecting information. And when I collected this information and you actually sit down and listen to them, you will realize that the stuff that they're saying, they actually believe. And the only way to get them out of it is basically to wait until they give you the full story of what they say, and then you say, okay, I hear everything you said, but what if I can show you that some of the stuff you believe is actually incorrect?
It's a perfect example of what makes Robert so dangerous. He can be extremely convincing to people who don't have a complete, thorough understanding of the topic. Thank you to my patrons. I didn't expect or plan for this video to be so long.
So if I remember, I will link some of these channels in the comments. And yes, be vigilant out there. Be careful. Make sure you don't fall for these easy plots. And remember, just because someone is saying something you like doesn't mean is correct. And just because you hate what they're saying doesn't mean they're incorrect. This seems fairly obvious. It's one of the reasons why I'm not one of these people who sits there and says all of their information is completely incorrect, that everybody's a super liar, and blah, blah, blah. Take the information and see if it completely contradicts what I already believe. And 90% of the time, it really doesn't. And you don't need to be a liar in order for that to happen.